Hi there, welcome to the Mindset Check podcast. I'm your coach, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do. And we also believe that we can gain more power by being mindful of defaulting to love in our life. How are you? How is life paving forward for you? I'm really happy to have seen so many of you in the Facebook group for Mindset Check. Feel free to always check that out if you haven't yet. And for those of you who are regular listeners who've listened to the podcast from the beginning, I have an announcement for you at the end of today's episode. So be sure to stay tuned. And really quickly, for our new listeners, I want to tell you a little bit about this Mindset Check podcast. In the first season, we're reading through my journal from when I was 15, and I tackled a few really tough years of being pregnant and losing my little girl. And really, it just sets the stage for us each week to operate and move forward in a raw and vulnerable state, walking through mindset and life and the different things that we experience as we go through life and how much power we have when we really break those things down. So that's what we're doing in this podcast. And if you are a new listener and you're interested in listening to the whole story, you can start at episode number 1. Today's episode is going to be just a little bit different. We're not reading a journal entry. And there's a reason, because there's an event that I didn't write down. And it makes me sad that I didn't record this and actually write it down. I feel like I was recording all of the bad things. We've talked about that before in previous episodes. But this is something that is very positive, and I'm only pointing this out to you so that you can be aware. I wish I was more aware back then of the emotions that I was checking into, because the emotions that we check into tends to be the vibration that comes back to us, right? So I know we've talked about that before, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage with that. Let's jump in. As the fall set in and I was living in Ogden away from home, maybe 4 hours of a drive away from my family, living in the basement of Tanya and Derek. And I was walking to the bus and riding the city bus to school. And the bus stop wasn't just right outside of my house like it is for a lot of school children. I had to walk to catch the city bus. And sometimes that happened in the snow with my baby, my diaper bag, and my books. And that was part of normal life for me. And when fall break approached, I hitched a ride with Gina, my other sister-in-law, Jesse's sister, to my parents' house. And it was hunting weekend, which meant chicken noodle soup at Grandma's house with homemade noodles and homemade donut holes. We spent so much time that weekend drinking in each other's company. And everyone, I remember, was very excited to see Taylor because she was right in those stages, in the first year of life where children grow so much and change very quickly. And so everybody had a lot of excitement and they had missed, both of us, but especially when there's a baby involved that just has, a surefire way to just make people happy. They were especially very excited to see Taylor. And she just had this way. Taylor had a way of, looking into your soul and just really connecting with you. And her features for a little person were very defined. And she was just a really special soul. And she just made you feel happy. We made a lot of cherished memories being with each other throughout those 4 days. And I was so happy for my sister Shelly that weekend because she had just bought her first beautiful brand new car. And Shelly's my older sister. She's older than me by 3 years. And so to watch her move into this like new phase of life, with a new car smell, and, it had those automatic seatbelts, which back in the day, automatic seatbelts were like, they traveled over the top of the window into the correct position when the car was started. And I was just thrilled for her because that felt like so new to me, and I was just so happy for her. And her previous mode of transportation was my grandpa's old Dodge truck. And this truck was brown with a wide white stripe down the side of it. And it was a little bit of a chore to drive, turning that great big wheel and just kind of all the, old technology, or maybe we should say zero technology, just straight mechanics. So I was thrilled for her. And we spent the weekend bonding and growing. We spent that weekend just very happy, feeling a lot of happy emotion, both with each other and just the ability to be around each other with all of us. And then also just in the celebration for my sister's new car. And when the time came to leave, my arranged ride was to be arriving soon, and all my bags were packed. And as we prepared to leave, everybody hugged and kissed each other, and we hugged and kissed again, because that's just what we do. And it was then that my sister and my dad told me that my sister-in-law was not going to be picking me up. They had arranged it to look like that so they could surprise me. And my sister told me, she told me that I would be driving her brand new car back to Ogden, and that I could use it until after the quarter when they would come back to get me. I drove away in tears, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. These were the days when the car seats, there wasn't as much guidance with car seats. And I remember Taylor was sitting up front with me, and she was in her car seat. And I remember reaching over and just holding her hand and just feeling recharged. And I'm just in awe. I'm in awe. I've actually never asked my sister how much of that was her idea or suggested by my dad. But that bond of what she sacrificed for me, because she watched her car that she just purchased drive away, and she happily took the keys again to my grandpa's old Dodge truck. And overall, sometimes it doesn't, especially as a parent, it might not seem like that much of a sacrifice. But to a teenage girl, to another teenage girl that understood what the sacrifice was, that just created a bond between us. That has, lasted the span of time. I just really wanted to make sure that I put this experience in with all of the other experiences that we're talking about, because I want people to understand. I want you to understand that families are what we make them. And we have the power to show up for each other in ways that will never be forgotten. And I know that for me, the sacrifice that was taught to me and given for me in my name has influenced my life. And I know that doing the things that requires sacrifice and doing it with love in our hearts allows us to form deep bonds, and whatever it takes to do that is worth it. Every single ounce of energy you put into your family is worth it. You know how they talk about how siblings, they're like ride or die, right? Because you come into the world with your siblings and you know them from birth. They're the people who will know you the longest and will probably, most likely, be by your side until you're both aged, and then graduate. They're the people who will probably be the most constant in your life. And I wanted to drop in and talk about that when we love and when we do great things, it's like this quote, and I don't know who wrote it, but it says, "Sacrifice for those we love is a natural enhancement of love if it is done with the right heart." And, everybody always says, right, love is a verb. It's an action. Love is manifested in actions. And you can take the same event, the same thing, and if you're doing it with love in your heart, the result is different. The result is better, and it causes you to form bonds. And love can cause us to do so many things. Love is like the great motivator. Love teaches us how we can alleviate pain and help people around us. Love opens up gates of forgiveness. It's not always easy. People aren't always easy to love. Sometimes we have issues. But love is always the answer. And I love looking at love in the scientific realm. If you think back to one of our first episodes, it was episode, I think, 9. It was episode 9. And in episode 9, we talk about the rabbit story and how when the scientist cares for the rabbits with love, there's a different outcome than when the other caregivers care for these rabbits. You can go back and revisit that story. But that's one example of how love in the very moment changes things. We also know that when infants are loved and when children are loved, they form insane benefits for the rest of their life. They have a greater chance at just being a stable, healthy, happy human being. So many things are decreased. Their risk for depression and sensitivity towards anxiety disorders and memory is improved when we're loved when we're little. We know that there are many health benefits, mental health benefits, and attachment, having a healthy attachment. It's incredible. The motivating, or I guess the power behind love. Marianne Williamson said, "When infants aren't held, they can become sick, even die. It is universally accepted that children need love. But at what age are people supposed to stop needing it? We never do. We need love in order to live happily, as much as we need oxygen in order to live at all." And what's really great is when you see the disorders that came, in people's lives because of a lack of love. It's cool to see how later in their lives, it's love that can also heal them. And when you really look at the stages that we go through in life, how those of you who might have teens or be close to some teens, it's interesting how they can grow this like barbed wire and they resist hugs when they become a teenager. And until you kind of have the breakthrough and they realize, I mean, all teens are a little bit different, but some of them are just a little bit standoffish. And Virginia Satire said, we need 4 hugs a day for survival. We need 8 hugs a day for maintenance. We need 12 hugs a day for growth. For growth. Think about why that is. Because it initiates feelings and it allows us to become in alignment with a higher level or a higher vibration feeling, and then it allows us to grow. And we're going to talk about how that comes back to us as we go through our life. But I love the quote as well that said, teens need 8 hugs per day. If they don't get it from you, where are they getting it from? Sometimes in our minds we think, oh yeah, I'm just going to leave them alone. They're being prickly or whatever. And there's a little bit of giving a respective space, but gosh dang it, they need affection. They need attention. And adults, look at us. We can so easily get caught up in the doing and the accomplishing, the day in, the day out, and the stress that takes a front seat and love can so often take a back seat. And so many times as adults, we feel put out. When something comes along that's actually an opportunity for us to love. I love one of my mentors says, just figure out how you can love them into life. Why don't you just wake up and ask yourself, what can I do today to love the people in my life, to love them back to life? If that was our only motivation, it's amazing what could happen. And it can be yours, and your life will change if you adapt to that. If you think that that's a good idea and you decide that that's what you want to invite into your life. The action of the things that we do might be the same, but remember that the reasoning inside of your mind is what makes an act of love or an act of duty. Another amazing quote from Marianne Williamson says, love in your mind produces love in your life. This is the meaning of heaven. Fear in your mind produces fear in your life. This is the meaning of hell. So let's break this down a little bit. Let's try to dive in to see what does she mean? What does it mean that if I have, love in my mind, then it produces love in my life? Because that's the sentence that we really want to attach to. It's easiest to think about it from the perspective of the old saying that says, what goes around comes around. There's a term called homophily. This is a theory from sociology that people tend to form connections with others who are similar to them in characteristics such as socioeconomic status, values, beliefs, or attitudes. The phenomenon known as homophily is that when you're generous, chances are you're going to attract others who are similarly generous to you. And hanging out with other generous and compassionate people is, for obvious reasons, more happiness enhancing than hanging out with self-centered and materialistic people. So if we love and we set out to love people in our life, if you close your eyes right now and you see the people that you come in contact the very most in your life, and you think of the ways that you can love them into life, let that be your motivator. Mother Teresa said, "It's more important to do small things with great love than to do great things with little love." I just love this so much because I think it's really important that we're being mindful of defaulting to love. And with all of the things that we dive into about our brain, that you and I have talked about, with the way that our brain functions, is that our brain defaults to feelings. We've talked about neural pathways and how they become very well-defined paths in our brain, like a hiking path. When it's a very well-defined path, you don't even have to think about, your steps. And that's how, when a strong way of thinking is in your brain, the way that it connects inside of your brain are these neural pathways. And those are the default ways you have of acting, of thinking, of being, of doing. And when something isn't traveled often, if it's not normal for you to travel down the road of love, if it's more, something that you're used to travel down the road of duty, or, kind of just signing up because you have to, then that's a path that's like a hiking path that's very, covered up with weeds and rocks, and you have to think about every single step that you take. That's like the difference between how easy it is to get up and perform a habit, like going to the gym. When it's a habit for you, it's easy. But when it's not a habit for you, it's like walking that path. It's like walking the path of weeds and paying attention to all of your steps so you don't twist your ankle or run into the thorns or whatever it is. And it feels hard and it feels difficult. But our brain, there's something called neuroplasticity, and it means that your brain is changeable, it's moldable, that you have influence over your brain, that you have influence over your default ways. And so if love isn't a natural thing for you, if love feels like, tramping through the woods instead of walking on that awesome hiking path, the more that you take the path of love, even though it's hard, then the other pathways get grown over with weeds, and the love pathway becomes the very well-defined hiking pathway. It becomes the one that's easy. It's the one that you default to. So when I say be mindful of defaulting to love, that's such an amazing thing. And then to think of, if you are vibrating in that emotion, the principle with, or the theory of homophily is that you'll also attract people into your life that are defaulting to love. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing equation. It's an amazing thing to know about, because it gives us even more reason to strive for love, to strive to radiate, to vibrate, to feel often these higher level emotions. Because it becomes easier to feel that, to walk that path, and we attract it. We attract it to come back to us. I have an example from Secret Life of Bees, and if you haven't read it and or watched the movie, it's a fantastic story. I can remember when I read this book, there's a character in the book called, her name is May, and she feels people's emotions on such a deep level. She feels them in such a compassionate way, and it's a big fault of hers in life because it weighs her down too much. And her sisters have created this wall in the backyard where she goes out to the wall and she's able to write down the person's name or whatever the event was, and then she can roll it up and kind of stick it into the rocks that are part of the wall. And they did this as a way for her to process her feelings and to help her, because it was really just too much for her. Well, when I read that book, I can remember feeling that I just wish I was a little more like May. Trust me, I don't want to feel the weight of the world. Like, I'm not asking for that. But I feel like sometimes as we go through life, we become a little more resigned and cynical. We become a little more numbed to feelings, when we hear stories or when we hear of events or things that people are going through, we can become more numb to those things. And I think about the state of our world right now. And I just think about how many things are contributing to us becoming more numb to the feelings that are around us. I think that we all need a dose of May. It's interesting to me, a certain feeling that happens when I'm driving on the road and when someone is kind of like pulled over, and they're having whatever kind of trouble they're having. And back in the day, man, you stopped every single time. At least that's the person I was raised to be. You stop when someone has trouble and help them out, right? And nowadays I feel like people are like, yeah, I got someone coming, I got my cell phone. I called help from someone that I know, not from a stranger. And I feel like we are becoming accustomed to sort of not helping each other. There was an experience that happened to me a couple weeks ago, and I was in a rush driving to a city meeting, and I was going on a road that, I don't know, maybe you go 40 miles an hour on or something like that. And there was a stoplight up ahead, and I could see that it was green, and there was a line of cars in the turning lane waiting to go left. And all of a sudden, a car popped out from that turning lane kind of right in front of me, and I had to slam my brakes on so I didn't hit the car. It just popped out so that it could just go around the cars that were in front of it. Super impatient. Take off, and here, meanwhile, I'm slamming on my brakes. And luckily, that caused me to kind of slow down and survey the situation and see what was going on. And I stopped, even though it was a green light. I stopped because in my mind, I could quickly compute, like, if I don't stop with my, bigger SUV, then all of these other cars are not going to see that there's an issue. And as I stopped and I rolled down my window, there was this old guy. And this old guy, I honestly, I promise you, I really expected him to be like, yeah, I called someone. Yeah, I got help coming. I really, my heart expected that. It's just I didn't even think I was going to be stopping to help him. Okay. This just tells you. It makes my heart, a little heavy for the state of all of our brains. And I just go, oh my gosh. So as I started to talk to this guy, he's like in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. And he's got this old car, super old. It's beautiful because he's, redone it and everything. It's gorgeous, but it's a very old car. And it just stopped. So he was trying to turn left and it just stopped. And these cars are just flying by him and getting like upset and swerving around him and all this business. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to do something. And so the light had turned red at this point, and I was kind of like out of my car trying to like signal people. And I had to walk up to people's windows and be like, hey, is there a man in here? What do you guys have? Who can help? And people were still trying to fly by, and there was a lot of, and meanwhile, we have this old guy just broken down who has no phone and literally cannot push this car at all by himself. He has no help. And so luckily, once someone else was getting out of their car, more people saw and they started getting out of their car. And I was able to stop the traffic in the lane next to me. Long story short, we got his car. He sat in his little car and steered to drive off to the right, so cutting across the other two lanes of traffic, which is why I was standing there trying to stop everything. And then people kind of started like chatting with him, and I was like, we gotta go, we gotta clear the road. So we had to get out of the way, and there was other people who pulled in there to help him. And I drove away from that experience reminded of my own state and how we need to wake up to feelings. And how many of us walk through life assuming people are okay, whether they're on the side of the road or metaphorically, maybe they're on the side of the road in life, but they have their phone, and so we think they're fine. And I think that what we do is we assume that people are feeling awesome and doing fine until we see a tiny little crack in the perfection. And I don't even know why, but we assume that there's perfection even when the person's not intentionally showing us perfection. I mean, it doesn't matter what they're doing. Like we assume that everybody else around us has it together. And so many of us move through life like that. But then the moment that we're shown that there's a little crack in the perfection, that's what motivates us into actions, right? And it kind of causes us to wake up. It's kind of like the moment that I could see that guy on the side of the road really wasn't okay. He didn't even have a cell phone. I was like, oh man, we need to help him. And it woke me up. And how many times are we told that, the kid in your family that appears to not need the love needs love the most? So in this moment, it's just a good moment to take a little mindset check and to see in what ways that you've become a little rough like sandpaper because of our assumptions, right? Because of what you're assuming. And in what ways can you show up to love the people in your life back to life? In what ways are the people that are around us going to know we love them? In what ways are we going to be able to melt the hearts and break down the barriers? In what ways can we put our arms around each other? Because it typically takes us putting our arms around someone and letting them know that, hey, you're okay with me. Until they will pause for a moment. And then they connect with us once they know that they're okay. So just take that internal look and say to yourself, in what way can I show up? What does my home look like? Is there a lot of shouting? Is there any backbiting? Do I have something that I'm contributing? I love to show little children, and even after I show my children when they're little, I refer to it their entire life. What is the rock that you're throwing into the pond? So we throw the rock into the pond and we see the ripples. And sometimes we've had times where we break down what the experience is of the rock going into the water and what were the ripples of the things that happen around it. Because, someone in a family gets ticked off, and then somebody marches away from that event and gets mad at the other person, and then it is a ripple effect. And, that person gets mad at the next person in their life, and so on and so forth. So what is the ripple effect of what you're creating? And I don't say it so that you can feel guilty. I say it so that we can wake up. I say it so that we can tune into our feelings the same way that I had that deep desire with May. How I knew I wanted to be more like May because I knew I wanted to be more in tune with my feelings. Or the wake up that I had when I saw the old guy on the road. or the wake up that I've had when I've assumed too much about people who look like they have it all together in life, until you get close to them and you figure out they're normal people too. All of us need to be loved through life. And one of the things that my dad said to me in the last days of his living, my dad ended up going through prostate cancer. And the last few months were really tough. And we did have some really tender and sweet moments in his bed. Okay. And this is in the last, few weeks of him living. And I remember laying there with my dad. Such a sweet memory for me. And I remember my dad saying to me, "The important thing, Mish, is not that I love you and that you love me. The important thing is that you know I love you and that I know you love me." And if you think about that and you break it down and you ask yourself, do the people that I love so fiercely, do they know I love them? Have they seen my sacrifices for them the way that I see my sister sacrifice for me? Have I created those bonds with my people? Do I have that fierce attachment to them in my heart? Because it takes getting on their level. Just like a little PSA. Most of the time, you can't walk through life expecting people to get on your level. Okay? In other words, you have certain hobbies, or they have certain hobbies. You gotta leave your hobbies and join them in theirs. You gotta show up for them in life and ask them how it's going. Emotionally support them. Hold the great big containers that are empty, like in your mind, and allow them to come and just dump all their stuff inside these great big containers, knowing that you're just there to listen and you're going to hold it for them. One of my friends, Holly, says that her mother was such a great listener that she realizes that she misses that was like a form of therapy for her. And she has such a feeling of that loneliness or that absence because she didn't realize every day her mother lived. That it was such a thing that she provided for her. Sometimes we don't take the time to think how the people in our life have served us and loved us to life. And when we do that, we can move forward with gratitude and love in our hearts, and it's easier to love the people around us. And even when it's hard, tell yourself that the payoff is that you're creating something that will come back to you. And it might not come back to you through the same way, but it's still within your realm to make a difference, to change, to be someone who shows up first. Believing that we create our environments and it all comes back to us. And if we lead out in raising the vibration in our life, it comes back. Even your words and the way you say them. It's a vibration. It's a vibration that the more you tap into it, the more it becomes part of your life every morning when you wake up. And the default feelings that you feel. And the magnetism of what you attract to you every single day. And with that, I hope that you understand how much power you have in the thoughts you think, in the words you speak, and in the actions and the feeling in your heart as you go forward, helping the people in your life know that you love them. Whenever I meet someone who has been listening to my podcast or have a conversation with a friend who has been listening to my podcast, we always have the most juicy and just really great conversations. And so I have a really wild and crazy idea. I think it would be so fun to record an episode with some of my listeners, with people who have been listening to the podcast from the very beginning. And if that's you, I'm talking to you. I would love to set up a Zoom call. I'm planning on doing it in 2 weeks. And I would love for you to join us with me and other listeners. And what we'll do is we'll read the journal entry like normal, and I'll share a few thoughts or a little bit of background. And then I'm going to open up the floor so that you can join the conversation and ask me questions that are on your mind, either about what I had just read and talked about, or about anything that you have learned and listened to through the podcast as we've been going. This call will take place sometime around April 5th to the 7th, and I want to get feedback from you on how many could join the call at one time, and we'll just do it at a time that works for most of you. So if you'll reach out to me and tell me that you're interested in being on that live podcast recording, I would love it. DM me on Instagram at myfriendmisha. You can email me with the email address hello@myfriendmisha, or you can reach out to me through Facebook. I hope that this turns out to be a really cool event, and I hope that you're as excited about this as I am. And hey, thank you so much for letting me walk through a part of your journey with you today. I want you to remember that there is such a payoff. Okay, as if love, the feeling of giving and knowing what you're creating for others, as if that's not enough, remember that we talked about homophily today, that the vibrations that you put out into the world are also the vibrations that meet you every morning when you wake. They're the default feelings you feel, and they are what you attract back to you every single day. Until next time, my friends.